Story 1. I'm a low-level U.S. government employee. I just saw something I wasn't supposed to see. You know that meme about how presidents and governors, after getting elected, look super shell-shocked and stressed the next time they make a public appearance? Like the first thing that happens after you come into power is that you're pulled into a room and told all of the secrets of the world? Well, turns out it's true. As a matter of fact, it's a VHS tape. The 4-hour tape was always a bit of an urban legend at the office. I'll be keeping the details of my role in government very, very vague, but to be absolutely clear, I am very low level. My role is caked between layers of bureaucracy, and in the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty inconsequential role. When you're working at my level, you're generally not privy to any high-level secrets. Yes, top-secret meetings did occasionally happen in our building, but my focus is pretty limited and heavily administrative. So, you do what any other department does when you're in the bottom rung of the hierarchy. You discuss rumors, rumblings, crazy conspiracy theories, and everything in between. It's water-cooler conversation for us. Man, I wonder what the folks at the top are doing right now. That kind of stuff. Out of all of the rumors that fluttered around the office, the 4-hour tape was always the one I found the most fascinating. The crux of it, once you reach the highest clearance level, you are sat down and shown this tape. None of us knew what the contents of the tape were, or if a tape like this even actually existed, but it was fun to speculate about it every now and then. Most of the time, we found with our little rumors and conspiracy theories that the most mundane answer was usually the correct one. Life in general finds a way to surprise us with how boring everything can be. Now, there's something you should know about me before I continue. I'm a wimp. I'm meek, anxious, and generally restless. I'm a chronic rule follower. There's no part of me that wants to dig up secret documents and uncover the truth about what happens at the highest levels of government in our country. So when I discuss the events of 4 nights ago, please be mindful of that. I didn't ask for this. And I'm only sharing because I don't know how much time I have left anyway. And I can't live with this stuck in my conscience. Alone. It was nighttime at the office. I'm known to be a bit of a chronic workaholic, and there was something I really wanted to get done before the week was over, so I was working later than usual. I went to print a document on what I thought was the printer in my immediate vicinity. The notification on my computer showed that my document was being printed, but I didn't hear any noise or paper coming out from my local printer. I checked the name of the device I selected, and it looked like I'd accidentally clicked on a printer that was being used on another floor. I sighed. In any normal circumstances, I probably would have just forgotten about that mistake and reprinted the documents on my local printer again, but our general management here is quite stringent on us making sure that all confidential documents are accounted for. We are not allowed to share department-specific documentation to other departments. Fuck it, I thought. I looked up a map in my inbox showing the locations of all of the company printers. Turns out, I'd accidentally clicked on the printer named Prince Charming on the 7th floor. Ha! Funny name. Off I went. I really should have just let it be. I got to the elevator and rode it up to the 7th floor. I emerged onto the mostly empty office area. In case you were wondering, the building I work in is huge, but I'd worked there long enough to know my way around it, so I knew the area surrounding the printer relatively well. I made my way through the hallways and eventually spotted the printer with my freshly printed papers minting it. I gave myself a mental pat on the back for continuing my lifelong streak of following the rules. As I went to grab the papers, I noticed some light buzz in a meeting room nearby. I looked through the window to see roughly 10 people hanging out around a snack table. In the room was a large, old-looking TV on a cart and rows of some of the fanciest folding chairs I'd ever seen, organized in a neat fashion. I didn't think much of it and started walking off until I heard the door open. "Hey, Mr. Boskowitz, right? Jesus, man, we were supposed to start 15 minutes ago. Get in here." What? "No, sorry, I think you have the wrong... I don't care why you're late. Just get in here, grab a plate of snacks, and sit down. We're starting soon. Put your phone in the bag, electronic watch in the bag, and anything else on your person that can be used to record audio or video," he responded hastily. Something about his sternness and tone short-circuited my brain. For guys like me, there is a third option beyond fight or flight. It's called the just go with it until it's over, also known as the captured rabbit strategy. I put my phone and my watch in the bag. I meekly tried to butt in with another, "Sir, I'm not Mr. Boskowitz." But he had already pulled me into the room at this point. He closed the door and walked to the front by the TV. I thought about making a break for it, but I decided to just see it through at this point, hoping deep down that whatever was happening was as inconsequential as my job was. Everyone had their snack plates and were heading to their seats. I awkwardly grabbed a muffin from the snack table, put it on a napkin, and took a seat in the very back row. Everyone was spaced out from each other. It didn't seem like any of these folks knew one another. I quietly sighed at the thought of having to sit through some sort of boring informational seminar or irrelevant training session. After a few minutes of everyone settling in, the man who originally brought me into the room started talking. There was an equally serious guy standing next to him and a Secret Service-looking fella standing in the corner. I started wondering to myself why we were going to watch a video off of a very old-school-looking TV. Felt like we were all back in elementary school or something. "All right, I just need to do a final run-through before we get started," the man at the front said. "I know you all read through the emails and signed your releases. I just wanted to recap some ground rules. You're allowed to get up and grab another snack. But beyond that, we want you to pay full attention to the tape once it starts playing. If any of you need to go to the bathroom, we strongly urge you to wait until the presentation is over. If you absolutely have to go, we will pause the tape and one of us will escort you. There is water in the corner by the snacks. Cups are right there as well, and goes without saying. But any discussion of this presentation to folks who do not have top compartmented clearance is a breach of your terms of employment, a breach of your non-disclosure agreement, a breach of your multiple signed releases, a breach of the U.S. Criminal Code in the state of redacted, and a breach of the conditions laid out by the Committee for the Protection and Preservation of Human Consciousness." They started dimming the lights. Fuck. It felt like I had missed any window of opportunity I had to leave. Too late. That committee name he highlighted sounded way above my clearance level. One of the men at the front of the room pulled out a VHS tape from a bag and very slowly and securely put it into a VHS player. He pressed play. I took a deep breath. Those water cooler conversations I'd had with my coworkers were starting to float to the top of my mind, but I quelled them. There was probably no need for panic. It was just a stupid government meeting, right? The tape started. The beginning was familiar enough. Various disclaimers about this being incredibly confidential material, yada, yada, yada. Insignias of relevant organizations, presidential libraries, etc. I'd seen lots of videos like this already. But wait, that insignia looked strange, like something was off. I scanned it. Presidential libraries, that same eagle, those same stars. Weird. This time there was a navy blue hand on the left shoulder of the eagle. Did they update the logo? Before I had time to ruminate on it too much, the tape cut to a logo I had actually never seen before. Committee for the Protection and Preservation of Human Consciousness. The logo was just an image of planet Earth. Fair enough. The video cut to a room that looked similar to the Congress floor, but with some strange differences. Seats were much more spaced out, the podium looked like it had seen better days, and the whole room looked to be on a pretty steep incline. Everything was in black and white. It looked like there were about 50 people in attendance. It was hard to make out the faces. Everything looked very dated, like the video was from the 40s or the 50s. The tape lingered on this one shot for quite a while. Minutes passed. I noticed what looked to be a choir, all in outfit and perfectly huddled next to each other, standing in one of the corners of the room. It really felt like I shouldn't have been seeing this. None of this was meant for my eyes. After a few more minutes, the tape abruptly cut to an awkward angle video of a man speaking at the podium in the room. It was too zoomed in, enough that you couldn't see his eyes or his hair. It didn't look all that professional. I couldn't tell who he was. He spoke. Members of the Committee for the Protection and Preservation of Human Consciousness, I thank you all for coming tonight. We are lucky to be in the good graces of our visitors today. Without rehashing our painful history, the tape cut to a camera slowly panning over all of the faces of the folks seated in the room. The attendees looked pained, somber. The man continued his speech as the camera continued panning over the committee. We can acknowledge that the journey to this moment has been an arduous one. I am pleased to say that humanity, faced with a dire ultimatum, has come to a majority decision. To our esteemed guests from across the solar system, we are thankful for the opportunity you have given us to negotiate with you. I felt adrenaline. Fuck. We had made contact with extraterrestrial life. This was the truth. Maybe, like the saying went, the truth would set me free. Before I outline the decision taken by humanity, I want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank the brilliant representatives from all of the nations of the world who came together to ensure that this decision was taken with utmost responsibility, care, and appreciation for our human species. I am aware that this was not a unanimous decision. Shit. What did that mean? I felt the sweat on my brow. I felt nausea coming in. I awkwardly and slowly took a bite of the muffin. The tape returned to a now-corrected angle of the speaker at the podium. His eyes were visible. They looked strained, like they'd seen multiple versions of hell. To the nations who still disagree, he continued, I thank you nonetheless for accepting the majority decision. May this moment, which will be held in secrecy throughout the rest of time, be appreciated as a critical milestone for human civilization. Tonight is not a victory. It is a somber moment. However, we were faced with two options, extinction or accepting the agreement. We made our choice, and I believe time will show that this was the right decision. What was this? I hereby announce that we accept the agreement provided by our special guests who have chosen to go by the name Redacted. The intergalactic species known as Redacted will allow humanity on planet Earth to continue to populate, grow, and innovate. In return, all governments of the world will honor the promise. He needed to spit it out. What the fuck was this agreement? We will not be covering every element of the agreement in this session. I will, however, highlight the main points. At this point, the video showed the man at the podium looking down. He was reading off of something. For the first time, he looked nervous, scared. I saw some humanity in him. We honor the agreement that redacted hold the right to visit planet Earth on a recurring basis. They will be allowed to consume, for the basis of nourishment, a majority of the human population on planet Earth. After every visit, the remaining humans on Earth will be expected to breed and grow to capacity in time for the next visit. We acknowledge that we will maintain a parallel history which will be shared with our world's population to ensure that humanity stays motivated to continue existing as a species. This parallel history may suggest that mass extinction events are the results of man-made folly as opposed to the work of external forces. For the first time, my fight-or-flight response was actually flight. I wanted to escape, but I didn't know what I'd even be running from. The last visit by redacted was approximately in the year 1346, and it lasted 7 years. We will continue to honor our parallel history about this event. I just wanted it to end. The next visit, which will not be met with resistance, will be in the year 2028 and will run for 1 full calendar year on Earth, marking a 675-year gap between the last significant visit by the species known as redacted. This visiting cadence is expected to speed up over time as the remaining humans continue to sharpen their focus on building technology to allow humanity to reproduce in a speedy and productive manner. Jesus Christ, our planet is a fucking farm. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The tape cut away to a larger view of the Congress-like room, the somber committee members in attendance, and the members of the choir in the corner, who I could only imagine looked horrified. Where were the visitors? Why couldn't I see them? The camera then panned to a number of larger empty seats, the same slow style of video panning as the one that happened earlier with the committee members. No visible entities in the seats, but the seats themselves looked blurry. The man at the podium carried on with his speech as the camera pan on those blurry seats continued. We should acknowledge the privilege of knowing that there is indeed life in the cosmos, that extraterrestrial life has chosen to visit our planet, and that the cycle and balance provided by nature extends beyond the confines of planet Earth. Much like humanity has found its place on Earth in the food chain, we acknowledge our place in the divine order of things when encountered with beings of greater power, understanding, cognitive function, and evolutionary progression. Fucking hell, I shouldn't have stayed late at work. I should have made my identity clear from the very beginning. I knew that I wasn't supposed to see this. And while... Fuck. It really looked like the speaker was about to cry. While the process of consumption is a painful and lengthy one, we respect the trade-off that comes with the preservation of our species. We also acknowledge, as part of the promise, that substitutes for human life in the form of clones, should we discover that technology in the future or other living species, will never function as viable alternatives for nourishment, the speaker continued. I didn't need to know this. This whole thing was way too specific for me. Our final major acknowledgement, as part of this agreement, is that we accept redacted as the Great Almighty, as the entities we will now refer to as God. God, as an interstellar species, has revealed itself to us, and thus, the continued existence of redacted is now the true priority of the people of our planet. We are blessed to play a part in the continuation of God. In God we trust. Amen. The tape then cut to footage of the choir as the speaker continued. We bless our visitors with this gift, a performance of the national anthems of all major nations of the world will now commence. Audio of a very loud backing track of the Star-Spangled Banner started playing from the video as my stomach sank. The tape showed footage of the choir singing on top of the track. Not sure if it was because they were scared for their lives, but I could really tell they were singing their hearts out. As they sang, the camera continued to pan over the blurry seats. They finished singing the anthem, and suddenly, fast-forwarding. Fucking hell. I had forgotten I was sitting in a room. I had disengaged from the video for a brief moment. I had mentally returned to the present day. This was our world. This was our fucking lives. The men at the front continued fast-forwarding through the tape. It looked like they were skipping through performances of the other national anthems. The fast-forwarding went on for a while. Every small while, it looked like a new choir group was entering the Congress-like room to sing a different national anthem. On and on the tape went. I had to fight the urge to pass out. One of the men at the front of our room, standing next to the TV, started speaking up. "We are legally obligated to get to the end of this tape, but you don't need to look at the rest of it. Please feel free to look down or close your eyes or grab a snack," he said. I noticed the others seated in the room were taking that advice. Most of them decided to look straight down. For some weird reason, I couldn't look away. The fast-forwarding progressed. On the tape, it was yet another choir group joining to perform an anthem, and then another, and then another. It looked like we were near the end. The fast-forwarding now showed a conversation between the man at the podium and another man who was whispering in his ear. The man at the podium was vehemently shaking his head. The other man continued whispering. This continued on. Eventually, there was a quick moment of the man at the podium begrudgingly nodding. The last few fast-forwarded moments of the tape remain burned in my memory to this very moment. They were pandemonium. The attendees were sitting in their chairs, frozen, shivering, crying. The people in the various choirs were running around the rooms in fast motion as blurry spots started covering them and ungodly things started happening to them. Fuck. Why didn't I look away? If ever there was a fucking time to follow orders, it felt like the whole thing went on for longer than it should have. Finally, the men at the front of our room stopped the fast-forwarding. They pressed play on the tape to cover the very final moment. In the tape, the man at the podium, clearly emotional, spoke his final line. "The agreement has been ratified by redacted. Thank you all for attending." The final shot of the video is the full room. The committee members in their seats, shivering and crying. The dismantled and bloodied choir members strewn about the room. The blurry seats with blood smeared on them. The video then cut away back to that same insignia on a black backdrop. The presidential libraries, that eagle, those stars, the navy blue hand on the wing of the eagle. The lights in our room turned on. The rest of the night was a blur. The men at the front of the room told us it was best for us to sit for an hour to digest the information. No discussion about the video was allowed to take place. When we were ready to stand, we were allowed to leave and go home. They gave us some pointers on how to accept the information over the coming weeks. Things like taking long walks, exercising, watching a sitcom, etc. I wasn't worried about them realizing that I wasn't supposed to be there. If anything, I felt a strange camaraderie with everyone in the room. We were all truly in the same boat. As soon as I left the building and got in my car, I just drove, for as long as I could. I would stop for gas, then I'd keep driving. I'd stop again. Then I'd keep driving. Again and again. I'm holed up in a hotel now. I'm just glad I could get this off my chest. The funny thing is, all I can think about is the length of that stupid tape. While I can't confirm, I feel like if it were played straight through without fast-forwarding, it would have only been 3 hours. I wonder if the 4-hour tape rumor came from the fact that we all needed that extra hour to digest the information. And now, you're probably wondering, why don't I name the species that is going to spell humanity's doom throughout the rest of time? Why am I calling them redacted? Well, as the self-appointed leader of the Committee for the Acknowledgement that we should have just chosen extinction, I don't feel the need to honor our captors by calling them by their name. If I don't see you again, Reddit, I appreciate the water cooler conversation. Story. 10 years ago, I taught sophomore creative writing. 2 student stories still haunt me to this day. Fresh out of college, I took a teaching job in a small town in central Wisconsin. In my sophomore creative writing class, I assigned a flash fiction exercise around Halloween. We'd studied urban legends and folklore, and it was the students' turn to construct stories of their own. Assignment length, 101,000 words. Directions, scare me. The submission quality was as expected. These were sophomores, after all. But one story stood out halfway through my stack of papers. A piece by a quiet student named Jake. His first-person flash fiction story seemed so real, like it was dipped in reality, a little too closely. Almost like he wasn't making it up, but had been retelling something that happened to him. I put it aside, impressed. Kate's submission was the last paper in the stack. I remember the reading experience vividly, the beads of sweat accumulating around my temples, the clickety-click of the red pen in my hand, and a weird feeling of dread in the pit of my stomach. I placed it on top of Jake's story, and I thought, what the hell am I going to do? I still have photocopies of the original stories, and I often wonder, why do I still have these? But there is something about them. They are so interconnected, and there is something so raw and beautiful about them. I have a strong affinity for interesting student writing, and it'd be a shame to let the flames of these stories be extinguished. I'll share the student pieces and the subsequent events that transpired right here. I do enjoy a good story. Jake's flash fiction. My parents put Grandma Rosie in a home when she started to lose her grasp on reality, they said. I still found it cruel, but she seemed content. Content enough, I guess. I remember visiting her. She had an old wooden rocking chair that faced the window. Outside was nothing but flat fields of green. The green would eventually fade, and when it snowed, it was carpets of white for miles and miles. I'm not sure which season Grandma Rosie liked the most. She didn't do a lot of talking. She mainly listened to her radio and always one station, 89.1. But 89.1 never had a signal. It was always static. Grandma Rosie listened to this static all day, seemingly waiting out her life. No one could reach her. I visited one day to drop off a box of chocolates. Grandma Rosie rocked slowly in her chair with large headphones over her ears, staring out the window, watching the snowfall. I couldn't tell if she knew I was there. I walked over and placed the chocolates on a small table, and her hand suddenly reached across and snatched my wrist. "Shh," she whispered. "Listen." Grandma Rosie leaned in close, and I put my ear to hers. I lifted up the cup of her headphone and listened. There was only static. I was about to speak, but she covered my mouth with her hand. "Listen closer," she said. I did, but all I heard was more static. "Soon they will come," she said. "They will come to take me away." This freaked me out a little, and I went home. I told my mom and dad about what happened, but they didn't think it was that weird. I kept thinking about it. One night I couldn't sleep, so I buzzed my friend Abby on our walkie-talkies. She lived across the street, and she knew all about 89.1. She told me it was an old legend in our town, and you needed two things to explore the legend further: a radio and a closet with the door slightly open. Face away from the closet, tune in to 89.1, and listen very closely. At some point through the static, you'll hear the faint sounds of an organ, distant screams, and the dragging of metal chains along a gravelly surface. The open doorway is an invitation. Keep your eyes closed, and only if you keep your eyes closed, a figure will appear and drag you into the closet. From there, your fate is unknown. How do you know this? I asked. I've heard about it, she said. Don't tell anyone. The less people that know, the better. I looked out my window and saw Abby in her bedroom. She put her finger up to her lips. This is our secret, the walkie-talkie buzzed. For the next few days, I kept thinking about the ritual and Grandma Rosie. Why would she be playing this game? Why did she want to be dragged into an unknown fate? I again told my parents that I was worried about Grandma Rosie. They were very dismissive. Ever since Grandpa died, I think she wants to let go, my mom said. She wants to be with him. I wanted to know more, so I decided to try the game myself. It was late at night, and I opened my closet door just a crack. I sat on my bed with my back to the closet, tuned my radio to 89.1, and put on my headphones. I heard the static, and I closed my eyes. I sat there for a long time, focusing very hard on the static. The longer I sat there, the more it felt like my room was shrinking. Kinda like the space was filling up with something else, like I wasn't alone. In my headphones, I heard the distant organ, and I heard the screams that seemed far away but sounded like they were getting closer. The screeching of the metal began, and then I heard a voice. Open your eyes! I jumped from my bed, very startled. Abby was laughing hysterically through the walkie-talkie. I looked around my bedroom. I was alone. I looked out the window and saw Abby smiling and giggling. She brought the walkie-talkie up to her mouth. I totally scared you, she said. There's no one there. You're such a wuss. I noticed the closet door. It was wide open. The static of 89.1 hissed from my headphones. I was only joking, the walkie-talkie chirped. But I wasn't so sure it was a joke. Grandma Rosie died 2 weeks later in her sleep. Her time had come, and I was done fooling around with legends and superstitions. Jake's story was the most interesting of the bunch. His writing needed some tightening, sure, but the ideas were there. A mysterious legend, sentimental characterizations, and an ambiguous ending. I truly thought he had invented the whole thing until I read Kate's submission. Kate's flash fiction panic, fear. No one would believe me. Not ever. I told him I was joking. About everything. It helps me sleep at night. But I know what I saw. A young boy, a ritual, and death. Death itself. A black death with a clutching grip, an entity that surrounds its victim, dragging a companion to its secret and eternal lair. But I was joking all along, which made it okay. I had to know more. I went to her room. It felt recently vacated, like the plug had just been pulled from a sink. Headphones on the floor, static. Nothing but static. Noises from the closet, labored breathing, fingernails squeaking on the door from the inside. I clutched the handle. Something else. Something dark. Can't open it. Won't open it. Refuse to let it out. I slowly back away. A tiny voice, squeaking. Help me. Static echoing in the small room. Nothing but static. I closed the door on my way out. Won't let it out. Won't tell. Will never tell. My story doesn't exist. It's simply not there. It's nothing but static. Here I had two seemingly intertwined stories. Jake's more traditional folklore story, and Kate's personalized flash fiction, focusing on emotion, regret, and secrets. Perhaps I'd been swimming in urban legends too long, or maybe I'd been the victim of too many horrendous student essays and stories to count, but I couldn't shake the notion. This seems real. A few days after Halloween, I kept Kate after school. I wanted to know more, specifically, was she the Abby character in Jake's story, and was she confessing to visiting the grandmother in her own piece? I pulled out Kate's flash fiction, and I asked about how she wrote it. What was her inspiration? She shrugged. I guess it's avant-garde. I was just experimenting with ideas. Did you like it? I nodded. It was an interesting piece, I told her. Have you ever heard of 89.1? Kate asked me. I started to speak, but couldn't. A few words sputtered out, but were interrupted by Kate's laughing. Oh my gosh, Mr. Patrick, the whole thing was just a joke. Kate explained how she and Jake conspired to write multiple viewpoints of the same story, partially as a creative writing exercise, but mainly just to screw with me. The whole thing was made up. It was a Halloween prank. We so got you, Mr. Patrick, Kate laughed. I smiled uncomfortably. It was a good one, and yes, they got me. I told her that I enjoyed her piece. Let's continue developing your avant-garde writing and enjoy your Halloween. But something didn't feel right. I had drinks with a veteran freshman English instructor, me the first-year teacher in a new town, and he the wily old mentor. I told him about the assignment and the stories Jake and Kate turned in. He laughed and thought about it a bit more. That just seems off, he said. You said Jake and Kate conspired to play a joke? They were thick as thieves in my class at the start of the school year. But in the fall, they stopped talking. Wouldn't even look at each other anymore. Had some sort of falling out. I guess they made up. For the next few weeks, I watched Jake and Kate closely in my class and in the hallways. They didn't speak once, never even looked at each other. I scheduled a story conference with Jake, and I let him know how much I'd enjoyed his growth as a writer, especially his Halloween flash fiction piece. I grinned and told him that his prank with Kate had totally burned me. Jake smiled awkwardly. We got you, huh? He said. It was Kate's idea. Everything was made up, he claimed. There was no 89.1, and he had no grandmother who passed away in a home. All of the characters and situations were straight, 100% fiction. I told him good job, and to keep writing. Still, the situation seemed amiss, like I was missing part of the act. Was it possible that these two were so committed to screwing with me that they wouldn't even speak at school? Or maybe they were dating and didn't want anyone else to know, so they played it cool in the hallways and in class. They were 15-year-old kids, after all. That seemed reasonable. But it was keeping me awake at night. Nothing else mattered. I taught during the day, and I obsessed over the stories in the evening. News, sports, and current events faded to the background. The real world slipped away. I pushed forward. Armed with a couple of possible last names, thank you school records, I called senior citizen homes in the area. I was trying to track down my mom's old friend Rosie, I told them. Each phone call followed the same script. The receptionist went through the files and found nothing. No one there by either last name I had. I scoured the internet, and I spent too much time in the stacks of the local library. I found no folklore or urban legends relating to 89.1. And each time I felt like quitting, I pulled out my photocopy of Kate's story. She had visited Jake's grandmother. It simply felt so real. I knew it wasn't fake. In a last-ditch effort, I spent a lot of time alone in my bedroom, listening to the static of 89.1 with my eyes closed and the door slightly ajar. I'd hone in on the static, and I'd listen deeply and intently for the chimes of the organ, the harsh and troubled screams in the distance, and the clinkety-clink of the metal chains. Sometimes I'd think it was there, and I just had to focus a little harder. And I'd sense a presence in my bedroom about to creep out of my closet, the dark mist waiting to drag me away. I wanted it to come because I wanted this story to be real, but it didn't come. One day at school, I saw Jake and Kate smiling and laughing at Jake's locker. I walked past them, and Kate winked at me. That was the clincher. I finally succumbed to the notion that I'd been had. It was over. I ended my search for 89.1. I had drinks again with my colleague, many drinks this time, and I drunkenly told him everything I'd been doing. He found my investigation ridiculous and ultimately dangerous. "You like stories too much," he said. "If I didn't know any better, it's almost like you're trying to write one of your own. Just let it go." I pulled out the photocopied stories from my back pocket, and I pressed them down on the bar, staining them with splashes of beer. My colleague picked up Jake's story, and he took a look at it for the first time. His eyes skimmed the page, and they stopped, cold. "Wait," he said. "You never told me about Abby." I shrugged. Abby was Kate, I told him. It was all part of the game. "I wonder," he thought aloud to himself. He laid it out for me. A year ago, about 10 months before I moved into town, an 8th grader named Abby had gone missing. Seemingly vanished into thin air. One minute she was alone in her room, and the next minute she was gone. Some suspected that she ran away, but there were no clues, no evidence of foul play, no suspicious or shady family members or neighbors. She was simply gone. I read Kate's piece again. My heart sank. The whole time I assumed it was about her visiting the grandmother. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe the squeaks and pleas coming from the closet were coming from Abby. Kate never specified who she was visiting or where she was. I read the avant-garde flash fiction one more time, honing in on every word just to be sure. And at that moment, everything changed. I spoke with the school administration, they contacted the authorities, and the police had conversations with Jake and Kate. It went nowhere. It didn't matter that Abby had lived across the street from Jake. It didn't matter that we had words on paper. They were just stories, the kids said. Only stories. Complete fiction. Jake had no grandparents in a home anyway. They were sorry if they'd scared anyone. They were Halloween stories after all, and pretty ambiguous stories at that. Jake even tearfully apologized for naming a fictional character after a missing girl. It hadn't crossed his mind. And I was now the monster for dragging 2 innocent kids into this mess. The staff ostracized me, and the town crucified me. I was done. I left the teaching profession soon after that. I walked out of the school holding my small crate of supplies, and Kate smirked at me with a knowing glance through a first-floor window. I haven't seen her since. I didn't take much with me. But I did take the photocopies of the stories. I pull them out occasionally and relive the past. And sometimes, late at night, I'll get a fire in my belly and a burning desire to travel back to that small Wisconsin town. Maybe Grandma Rosie was a great aunt that Jake's family referred to as Grandma. Or maybe it was an elderly family friend. Maybe I missed something about the missing girl, about 89.1, about Kate's intentions. Perhaps I can try the ritual a few more times, just to see what happens. Or maybe it's just all bullshit. It was 10 years ago, and I'm probably the only one that thinks there's a shred of truth in those stories. I'd be wasting my time, but it still keeps me up at night. The slim chance that it's all true. And oftentimes the idea of it is something I contemplate more than what really happened to Abby and the grandmother in the story. If it is true, why did the kids write it all down like that? I don't have a good answer. I'll never have one. I suppose that, just like me, they really just enjoy a good story. Story 3. I posted a picture of my great-grandfather over to our old school cool a few days ago. I posted it on my main account, not this one. I regret posting it. It's turned my family's lives upside down, opened up possibilities I'd rather not even contemplate, and thrown into question everything I thought I knew. I was scanning some old family photos onto the computer from my mum. I've always been fascinated by my great-grandfather. My mum always has so many stories to tell me about him. And how he brightened her childhood. He was truly a remarkable character. Plus, he was a particularly handsome man. I've always loved that photograph of him, with his chiseled face and his dark eyes staring into the distance. He wasn't looking directly at the camera. It's the only photograph we have of him. My mum says he was caught off guard by that photograph, because he normally never liked having his photo taken. Before I posted the photo, I was pretty certain he'd be a surefire hit with the online crowd. And I was right. But, at the same time, I was still surprised by the extent to which people agreed actually with me. The photograph shot up to thousands of upvotes very quickly. My great-grandfather was internet famous. I got the usual, "Oh my goodness, your great-grandpa was so handsome," and "Is your great-granddaddy single?" comments. Also, "Hey, can we have a picture of you, OP, so we can see how much of the good looks you inherited?" The first few comments made me smile and feel oddly proud of my genealogical inheritance. After a while, it started to get a bit creepy, as some people started to cross boundaries and take things too far. I started to feel guilty. Sure, there were some beautiful, respectful comments, discussion, and questions, but as the popularity of the photograph steadily increased, so did its exposure to the world in general, and that was when the less-than-savory character started coming out of the woodwork. I never knew my great-grandfather, but from everything that I've heard, he was such an upright, almost regal sort of man, well-bred, well-educated, respectable, and dignified. A true gentleman, and he had been greatly loved and revered by my family. And now, it felt like an oxymoron, this clash of worlds, having my amazing, dignified great-grandfather on display for the ugly underbelly of the internet to ogle and make crude remarks. It felt like I was violating his memory, like I was literally whoring him out for my own personal gain. And what gain? A few arbitrary internet points? I was about to remove the post when two things happened in fairly quick succession. First, someone kindly offered to colorize the photo and asked for details about hair, eye color, etc. I asked my mum for details. She had been very close to her granddad, and she could remember everything very well. The most striking thing about him that you couldn't see from the black and white photograph was that he had two different colored eyes, one a deep green and the other dark brown. In the black and white photo, it just looked like there was a shadow over the darker eye. When the colorized version came, it was beautifully done. They got the shades exactly right. That made the whole online sharing experience slightly redeeming, I must say. I showed my mum, and it made her cry. I'd almost been afraid to show my mum because she had loved her grandpa greatly, to the extent that she still didn't like to talk about the end of his days. All I know is that it had been an extremely traumatic time for her. She sometimes still tears up if something happens to remind her about the end. Anyway, a few minutes after the colorized version was posted for everyone to see, someone responded. "Hey there, I know this is going to sound really weird, but after seeing that colorized photo of your great-grandpa, I know a guy who looks exactly like him. Seriously! He comes into my coffee shop almost every day, so I see him a lot. It's like his doppelganger or something. I'm going to take a photo and send it to you tomorrow morning. I swear, it's exactly like him." I checked out the poster's history, and it didn't look like he was a troll or anything. I don't know. Something about his entire post history and earnest way that he'd written the message made me believe him and feel mildly interested about the promised picture. His enthusiasm seemed genuine, and so I was intrigued to see this alleged doppelganger. Most likely it wouldn't look like my great-grandpa at all, though, I was sure. After all, we're often told by friends that they know someone who looks exactly like so-and-so, and when you see the proposed twin later on, it's usually quite disappointing. So I just replied, "Hey, cool! I can't wait to see the photograph of my ancestral twin, ha-ha." And then soon forgot all about it, basically. The next day, though, I got this message. "Hey, so I know I promised a photograph, and here it is. Just a quick disclaimer. I was hoping to get a straight head-on shot of the guy. I asked him if I could take his photograph, and he asked why, and I tried to briefly explain without sounding too stupid. Basically, I told him that there was a picture on the internet that looked just like him, and I wanted to send his picture to a great-granddaughter of the dude he looked just like. It sounded progressively weirder as I tried to explain it. Ha-ha. It made me realize that things that are perfectly reasonable on the internet can sound so utterly bizarre in real life. Anyways, I don't know why, but he got quite angry and wouldn't let me take his photo. I mean, fair play to him. Not everyone likes their photo taken to be shared on the internet. But I mean, it was weird how his attitude just did a 180. He's always so friendly and nice, and he tips really well. I would have expected him to say no nicely, but it really upset him. He was very curt with me. I got the sense now that this'll be his last visit here, which is a shame because he seemed like a cool dude before all this. Anyways, so I didn't want to let you down after the build-up yesterday. Plus, the fact that he seemed so annoyed meant that he likely won't come back, and so this would be my last chance to get a photo. So I know this is really iffy, ethics-wise or whatever, but I sneaked a photo anyway, haha. He had to stop at the door. He held the door open for someone coming inside. So I was able to snap a quick pic, but he wasn't looking right at me, which is both why I was able to take the picture, but also why the picture isn't that great. It's a side pose, so maybe you won't be able to see the resemblance as well as if it had been from the front. But seriously, I still thinks it looks just like your mom's grandpa. I hope you'll agree. Let me know what you think. Given the lengths this poor guy had gone to in order to attain this picture, I was quite amused. So I clicked the photo with neutral expectations. The man was visible in side view, but I had to admit he did bear a passing resemblance to the colorized version of my great-grandfather. Maybe he was a distant relative somehow. It bears noting that the guy who sent the photo was practically on the other side of the world to me, and to my knowledge, I have no relatives in America, so this is really unlikely. I thought the doppelganger photo would amuse my mother, who of course had known her grandfather very well. It would be interesting to get her opinion on it, I thought. I took over my laptop to her and showed her the photograph. She glanced at the screen, first absent-mindedly, but then she did a double take. She couldn't take her eyes off the screen. "My God," she said, putting her hand to her mouth. She leaned into the screen, peering at it. "Can you zoom in on his face?" I zoomed in as much as I could without making a pixelated, blurry mess of the face. She stared at him for what seemed like ages. "My God, it looks just like him," she said finally. "I mean, honestly, just like him. I mean, even—" She ran her fingertips over the screen so earnestly and lovingly. "Do you see the slight scar there? On his cheek? Near this ear? He used to tell me stories about how he got that. A different story every night. I was so little. I'd sit nestled on his knee and gaze up at that scar, sometimes until I fell asleep. And—" She gasped and pointed at the scar on the man's hand, which was clutching the cup of coffee. His sleeve was slightly lifted back. There was the trace of a scar protruding from his forearm, extending onto the back of his hand. That one, too. That one was so prominent. It was a deeply cut scar. I could feel that one underneath my fingers when I held his hand. It seemed huge to me then, underneath my small hand. He'd tell me stories about that one, too. Silly little stories to amuse me. Fights that he'd gotten into, or mythical beasts he'd wrestled. She sighed and smiled, lost in her happy childhood memories for a moment. And then, I guess, the bizarreness of the situation hit her. The man holding the coffee in this modern photograph was a young man, and yet he had the face and accurate identifying features of my mother's grandfather. She sat down heavily on the chair next to the table. "How is this possible?" I asked, voicing the obvious question for both of us. "Could it be a hoax?" she said. "Could this man, who sent you the picture, could he be playing a trick on you? These internet people can be so clever with their Photoshop stuff, can't they? Could they have worked from your original photo?" "Well, yes, maybe, but—" I trailed off. I mean, it was the only possible explanation I could think of. Anything else would be too bizarre. I brought up the original photograph, the one where my actual great-grandfather was facing towards the camera, more head-on. The scar near his ear wasn't visible due to the angle of his face. His hand wasn't in view at all, either. My mother and I both took in these details wordlessly. She stared at me, her eyes wide. "This is impossible," she said. "It can't be possible." I sat down next to her. We sat in silence for a while. My blood was ringing in my ears. There had to be some explanation, surely. It had to be a trick or a joke, somehow. Or just a really, really weird coincidence. Having said that, the picture wasn't that great quality. You could see the scars once my mom had pointed them out, but not before. So maybe it was like an optical illusion, like one of those hidden pattern type things that aren't really there, but you make yourself see them, and then you can't unsee them. Maybe it was like that, and the scars weren't really there, and we saw them because my mom expected to see them, because the man's face looked a bit like her granddad, and she'd made me see them now, too. Hey, it could be a prominent vein on his hand or the lighting or something, and the lighting had caught it just right. I said all of this to my mom, and she nodded along, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. "I suppose," she said, and then she trailed off. "But—" "What?" "It might have something to do with what happened at the end." She was staring at the floor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her hands were shaking, and she seemed frightened. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. She shook her head. "I'm being ridiculous," she said. and she just got up and left. Her whole body was trembling, and I could see tears on her face. You have to understand some backstory, even though admittedly I don't know all that much. Mom has never spoken about those last few days, despite my previous careful prodding. All I know is it was a traumatic time when she lost him. It was some sort of violent accident. I know no details beyond that. She still has nightmares about it, and was in therapy for some time. I was itching for details when I was little, but I had eventually made peace with the fact that I might never know. Any small details had been like gold dust. She talks about him all the time, his life, his character, passing on his wisdom, but never about those end days. Not to me, and never to my dad either, because I've asked him. It's basically restricted territory for our family to discuss. I think, partially because of the mystery around his end days, and what an amazing person she describes him to have been. I've always been so intrigued by this man's presence in our family history, and the bond my mother shared with him, how he had shaped her character. I guess it's because of this general awe and intrigue that I'd scanned that old picture into my laptop in the first place. And then why I posted it online, because I wanted to share his essence with the world. So of course my natural curiosity was on fire when she just walked away like that, so close to telling me more, and clearly in some sort of turmoil. And she thought, whatever it was that happened at the end, might be related to this modern-day man walking around who looked like him. How on earth is that even possible? And what the hell was it that happened? I really wanted to go after her and just open up my flood of questions, but she seemed in that unreachable mood again, like she often did when she was reliving her traumatic memories. I could hear her crying, and I didn't want to open any wounds. So I just sat there, awkwardly, my nerves a squirming bundle of unease, and confusion and an uneasy feeling of fear, I guess. I was trying to process things, but just coming up blank. The modern photo was just a coincidence. We were seeing scars where there were none, and I'd managed to open up a whole can of traumatic worms for my poor mother, probably messing with her mental health. I should have known better than to post about this sensitive subject online at all. My mind was made up then to delete the post and forget all about it. I logged into my account, and I had hundreds of new messages. I'd been offline most of the day because my mom and I had been discussing the new photo for quite a while. I opened my inbox with a bit of a sigh, expecting more of the same general comments of jokes and compliments and the occasional lewd remark. Except, what was posted just amplified my unease by 1,000. I have no idea what to think. I'm terrified now. I think I've opened up a Pandora's box in our family history. Here's what happened. After that guy posted the modern photo of my great-grandpa in the coffee shop, along with the colorized version from the other user, there had been a barrage of comments. Here is just a sample that I copy-pasted and saved at that time. There were many, many others, though, some that I didn't even manage to read. Edit. I've now quickly edited out their usernames. Sorry if this messes up formatting. User 1. Dude, this is going to sound pretty random, but that guy looks just like a mythical figure famous in my hometown. They say he's evil and has a flying beast at his behest that he'll summon if you cross him. The sounds of its helper creature's screams are enough to kill you. We have an old portrait of him in our town hall. It's basically part of our heritage. They say that many years ago he and the Screaming Falcon wiped out half the town population because they mistreated him. I'm going to post the portrait tomorrow. Same chimera eyes and everything. Freaky. Reply to the above. User 2. Are you from my hometown? I won't post the exact place BC doxing, but are you in South America? We have exactly the same legend here, except we call him something different. We call him the cunning-eyed one. They say he has two different colored eyes because his flying minion can see through one of his eyes. Anyone he doesn't like, anyone with attitude, the monster flies over immediately. Its screams are enough to paralyze you and pulverize your flesh just from the sound alone. I used to be so scared whenever I heard screaming during the night. My mother would scare me and my brothers with the cunning-eyed man all the time whenever we misbehaved. And there are old people here who swear they've had run-ins with him or know someone who has. Everyone thinks he's real. I got thrills when I saw you mention the legend. Reply. User 1. I'm not from South America. I'm from a tiny town in Eastern Europe. How scary that you guys have basically the same legend over there. I've never heard anyone else mention this legend other than here in my hometown. User 3. Wow. Now that you post those two photos. I have an old book of legends. One of the illustrations is of a handsome dark-haired man with two eye colors. They say he's a cruel monster disguised as a man, uncannily clever. Anyone who fails his tests is woken up to the sound of screaming, and the screams make their flesh rot and fall off. It's described in so much detail with historical eyewitnesses and stuff. The man looks like the photo here. Sorry, OP. No disrespect to your grandpa, but it looks so much like him. This was an old legend from a small, remote Scandinavian village, I think. I can't remember the name they gave to the monster. I'll dig out the book and post more details. The way it was described gave me the creeps. Never heard anyone talk about this before. It was a really obscure legend. User 4. OMG. I know what you guys are talking about. We have a similar legend in India. In the village where my parents were from. I am so excited to hear others talking about this. My mother would tell me about something that happened to her aunt when she was little by the rough translation, cruel, one-eyed demon with his helper, the screaming devil. They call him one-eyed because they said he could only see through his dark eye, or he closed one eye to look at you through his good eye. I'm going to have to type out that story properly for you. I'm going to get my mom to tell it again. Seriously, me and my cousins loved and hated that story in equal measure. It was so scary and we'd never sleep afterwards. We'd freak each other out by screaming in the middle of the night and scare each other awake. My older cousin did that once and I peed the bed. I was so scared. TMI, I know. All the elders in our village would tell us about it when I visited back home. OMG. I am so thrilled that other countries have this same demon guy in their history too. It makes it so much scarier, like he really roamed the world. Wow. I can't wait to tell my cousins. This is like all my childhood excitement, fears rushing back. User 5. We have a very similar urban legend in the place where I am from. They say he has the strength of 1,000 men, and he flies from place to place on the back of his winged, screaming monster thing. It had a name. Can't remember it. They have different names for it. They say that he had different colored eyes, one evil and one good. And depending on how he felt about you, he would use one or the other to look at you. If he looks at you through the black eye, you're screwed, basically. I also remember something about the screaming. It was my grandpa who would tell us kids stories about him that he heard from his mother. Pretty cool to see it being talked about on here. My family is from a small village in China, but haven't heard anyone else mention it. I thought the stories died out with my grandpa. User 6. I'm blown away, honestly. I thought this story was just an urban legend confined to my family, or something. I had a great uncle who swore he saw this man with unusually uncanny, beautiful eyes that were two different colors. He was almost hypnotized by them. The man, who my great uncle always swore up and down was not a man, but rather a monster of some kind, presenting himself like a man, was very strong, and my uncle was very scared. My great-uncle was working in a factory on the night shift. This man managed to bend metal with his bare hands or something because he was angry. My uncle was freaked out, and he managed to get away from that place, came with a high fever. The next morning, the people who were there at his work that night were found literally pulverized. On phone, we'll type out whole details later if anyone interested. Can't believe others are mentioning this same sounding man in other parts of the world that match up to what my great-uncle said. Never really believed it fully until now. User 7. Guys, I had that photo open in my browser and my grandma walked past. She's visiting us. I'm not lying, I swear. She saw the photos and she did a double take and just froze. She's saying the man's a terrible creature from her childhood. I've never seen her like that before. She was legit scared and asking me where I got the photos, why I was looking at him, where were these photos taken, was this man still alive, where was he? And she was getting all worked up. She just left our house and she's gone home now, really abruptly, won't answer my calls. She seemed really upset and shaken. I swear I'm not making this up. Reply. Which photo? OP's great-gramps or the new pic? User 7, replying to the reply. Both. I was comparing them side by side just out of curiosity. I never expected a reaction like that. I'm really freaked out. And reading other replies here, even more freaked out. I'll see if I can get any more info from my grandma when she calms down. User 8. I feel really sorry for OP. Turns out her great-grandpa looks just like a legendary demonic monster guy. User 9, replying to the above. What if OP's Gramps really is this monster guy? Everyone swears it looks just like him, and it's his likeness that's triggered all this discussion. And on and on. Many legends and lore of a man who apparently looks just like my great-grandpa, with two colored eyes, one green, one dark brown, and different stories, but all sharing very similar elements to the lore that follows this man all around the world. Lots of people saying they heard this legend, these stories around this man, monster, demon. But here's the worst part. I felt really tired out reading all that stuff. I mean, obviously I reasoned that they've just latched on to the fact that my great-grandpa just happened to have the same unusually colored eyes as the man in these legends. But with my mom's reaction earlier, I was just feeling bad and overwhelmed, I guess. So I just left the laptop and I went to sleep. There were hundreds of comments I still hadn't read, and I'd changed my mind, and I didn't want to delete the discussion just then, because there were so many people involved, and the whole thing was just buzzing and taking on a life of its own, and so I felt like I'd be rude just to cut it off abruptly when there were so many people so excited. Besides, it wasn't even about my great-grandpa anymore. It was just that his multicolored eyes had unearthed a legend that people had thus far just kept tucked away in their little corners of the world until then. At that point, I was even slightly proud that my photo had managed to bring to light a hidden, very interesting-sounding, obscure legend that many cultures seem to have their version of. I felt I would enjoy the discussion more when I was better rested. I wanted to take another look at the updated discussion in the morning, so I left the laptop in the living room with the page open. Big mistake. I woke up this morning and my mom was sitting by the laptop, reading it all. Her face was white as a sheet, honestly. Even on her worst days, she's never been like that. even on the days when she's had nightmares that reminded her of how her beloved grandpa died. Even when she's been reliving the trauma, I've never seen her look like she did that morning. I was kicking myself for leaving the laptop open, so I snapped it shut quickly, so she couldn't read more. Kind of rude, but it was basically to protect her, and I just tried to laugh the whole thing off. She wasn't in a great place mentally anyway, because my stupid post had probably awakened further traumatic memories for her about his death, and I really felt awful to have pushed her to this point. The discussion about the legend of the two-colored-eyed man was an offshoot and unrelated. She had no business reading about it in her anxious state. I know, Mum. It's weird how there's a legend about a creepy figure with similar multicolored eyes. I laughed. I guess there must be something in our collective unconscious about people finding chimera eyes scary or something. So they built a legend around that. She stared off into middle distance, her gaze still fixed on the place where I'd closed the laptop monitor. I tried to talk about other things. I rambled on, actually, and she just sat there, transfixed, in shock. I was getting really scared now, so I got her a glass of water. She took it, just absent-mindedly, and held it, but didn't drink it. I was feeling terrible. There were goosebumps on my arms. Somehow, reading all that ridiculous, hyping up and exaggeration of the lore surrounding a two-colored-eyed man had messed with my poor mum's head. Was she having a mental breakdown? I really was such an awful human being for throwing my family's sensitivities to the mercy of the internet like this. I was wondering whether to take her to the doctor. She put the glass down and got up. She walked into the bathroom and slammed the door shut. I could hear the sound of her retching. I ran behind her and stood at the door helplessly, crying too, now, really, seriously, feeling like such a terrible person for opening this whole thing up. People on the internet think they can say what they want and run their mouths and create theories and not realize that those careless comments and hysteria can really impact people in real life. How dare I open up my family, my poor mum, up to that sort of stuff? She was having therapy for his death. She still had regular nightmares, for God's sake. Why did I ever think this was a good idea, and why had I let her be exposed to those horrible, persistent people getting their kicks from relating their stories? When she emerged, she was puffy-eyed and hoarse. "I'm so sorry, Mum," I said, and hugged her, held her tightly, trying to squeeze away the bad feelings somehow, to protect her from all that bad stuff, to fix her through sheer determined love. I really hate seeing her when she has one of her anxiety attacks. It was a constant fear of mine, to see her in that broken state when I was little. If you've ever seen a parent in a vulnerable state, you know exactly how awful, how scary, how heartbreaking it is. All that stuff on the internet, it's so stupid. I'm so sorry. "It isn't stupid," she said in a small voice. She basically pushed me away. "It's what I've feared all these years." She was looking at the floor. "Okay. So, Mum, I think we need to go see the doctor this afternoon." "I heard the screams," she said, looking at me in eyes for the first time. "I heard the sound of the screams. When I was little, I saw the—" She coughed and put a hand to her mouth, and I thought she was going to be sick again. But she wasn't. She swayed a little but steadied herself. "I had no idea about the scale of things. I had no idea he was— I guessed a little, but— Oh, God. I was always so afraid to face the fear I always had. I loved him so much. I never wanted to face it." She covered her eyes and started sobbing, deep, gut-wrenching sobs, and then she went into her room. She hasn't come out. I really have no idea what to think, how to feel. I can't even concentrate on the newer posts and messages I received. I've deleted the original post now with its photo and discussion. I just can't handle it. I feel numb, but there's this definite sense of terror, too, eating away at the back of my head. I feel so many large, unwieldy thoughts that make no sense, just clanging around in my brain, getting larger like echoes. But I can't focus on any one coherent thought. None of this makes sense. Things took an unexpected turn. Basically, after my post, I went to sleep and woke up just to find the letter, and my mom had gone out. It was quite late, but I figured that she'd gone out to clear her head. I was about to start reading when I realized how very late it was. It was like 2 a.m. My mom must have set out earlier. She'd been gone for quite some time. It was awfully late for a walk. I just got the sense that something was wrong. I decided to leave the letter and go after her. I paced all the routes she usually walks, but I couldn't find her anywhere. I was running here and there and everywhere I could think of in the dead of the night, calling her name, getting frantic. I tried calling her on her mobile phone, but there was no reply. It was just awful, absolutely terrifying, on top of everything else. The unthinkable things that were running through my head. I'm sure you can imagine. I searched until dawn and eventually called the police to report her missing. It was awful because it was a hollow feeling. I felt their help would be useless. It was just a terrible, bleak, tension-filled day as I waited to hear back. One day turned into two. I began to think I might never see her again. Eventually, well, it was a relief in some ways, because she turned up in hospital, alive, but she was injured. She'd been found in the street, unconscious, without any identifying information, bruised and bloody. They were able to ID her only when she woke up and told them her name, which is when they phoned me. When she was able to properly speak, she says that she hadn't been paying attention to her surroundings and she'd been violently mugged, her handbag taken. I'll be honest, I don't know what to think. She might be lying. What are the chances that we uncover what we do and the same day Mom gets put in hospital with such serious damage? My mom is insisting that it really was just a case of her being so shaken and disturbed that night, that she ended up aimlessly walking into a dangerous situation, much less vigilant than she would normally be because she was so distracted and upset at that time. I don't know what to think. I'm not going to cross-examine her too much, though. She's too shaken after everything combined. So, I'm sure you'll understand why things have been so messed up that I simply was not able to face the computer to update. I hadn't even been able to concentrate to properly read her letter fully, actually. It's only now that she's back and safe in bed that I've been able to focus enough to read the letter, and so I'm finally typing it up for you. Here's the letter she wrote that night before all this. Kate, I hardly know where to begin. How can I possibly condense the complex, beguiling character of that man, my grandfather, down to just a few pages? I have so many thoughts, so many memories. I never wanted to burden you with them. Besides, I could never be certain how much of it was just my childish mind, my imagination. I suppose now I know. I wish I didn't. How I wish I could have died with the happier memories at the forefront of my mind, without having to think about the rest. But I can't pretend any longer. I need to tell you everything I remember. If I don't, it's possible that I might be putting you in danger. Without knowledge, you are blind and potentially vulnerable, and I don't want you in that position. There were always signs, I suppose. For one thing, his mind was certainly different. He was so uniquely clever, so wise. Those same things that once made me admire him so much now make me shudder, thinking back. He could speak with advanced competence on any number of subjects. And his mental agility, my God. He'd be able to work out complex calculations in a flash. His memory was next to none. He'd read something and be able to recite it word for word months later, or be able to remember names and faces and conversations with astonishing detail, years after a mundane encounter. His charm snared him many friends. He had that ability to make everyone he spoke to feel like they were the most important person in the world. And he doted on me, his only grandchild. I remember I'd ask him what job he did when he was younger. He'd laugh and tell me something of everything. And he wasn't just worldly wise. He seemed to have this innate sense about people. He seemed to be able to guess my thoughts sometimes. He had an uncanny ability to know what I was thinking. At the time, I used to think it was all just par for the course. All children think so, don't they? When they're little, they think their elders are limitless fountains of knowledge. So when I looked back with an adult's eye, I really did think I was maybe confusing my memories with my childish over-admiration. I could never tell where my memories stopped and where my adoring imagination had colored them a little too much. But I remember one particular memory that stands out. I'd been naughty at school one day. There was a girl in my class. Her name was Sandra. She had gotten a beautiful doll as a present from her uncle who lived abroad. She brought it into the class to show it off. International travel wasn't quite so very commonplace as it is today, you have to remember. We'd never seen anything like that doll before. The whole class was clamoring to see. The doll was a rarity, with gorgeous jet-black hair and a darling pretty face and a beautiful, intricate dress. My young heart was in love with it and brimming with jealousy. What made matters worse, I hated Sandra. She was mean and pulled my hair and pushed me over during break. She was spoiled and nasty to me. She didn't deserve such a beautiful doll. When everyone was outside, I sneaked in, and my heart beating fast, I took the doll from inside her desk and put it into my bag. The girl didn't realize, and we all went home. I didn't dare risk taking the doll out of my bag to play with, or my parents would recognize the strange toy. But I was elated to have her in my possession, or at the very least out of Sandra's possession. As I got home, though, the guilt started to gnaw away at me. At dinner time, my parents didn't say anything, of course. It was business as usual, but Grandpa was visiting us. And he knew. I could tell he just knew. He closed one eye and scrutinized me. He'd always do that when I had something to hide. Look at me through that dark brown eye. I have never seen anyone with irises those particular shades ever other than him, even with other people with chimera eyes or otherwise. One was such an intensely dark brown that it was almost black, and the other was an unusually deep green. When he looked at me like that, it would feel as if he could see my soul. He did that a lot, not only with me. He would stop sometimes and squint one eye, appraising things. Looking back as an adult, I thought it was just an odd, perhaps endearing habit of his. At that time, though, I spent the entire dinner that evening feeling weighed down by guilt and terror, because I could tell by the way he was staring at me that somehow he knew exactly what I'd done. When we were done with dinner, I wasn't able to stomach a single bite. He took me aside to another room where Mama and Papa couldn't hear, and he asked me what I'd done. First, I tried to lie. I couldn't hide it from him. He started to look angry. I couldn't bear him being angry at me. I finally broke down and told him. In tears, I went to get my bag from my room and showed him the doll that wasn't mine. He looked stern and told me to return the doll to the girl. I did. I got to school early and quietly returned the doll to Sandra's desk before anyone realized it was gone. A few weeks later, my grandpa gave me a present, wrapped up. It was a doll, just like Sandra's, except with an even nicer dress, with a note congratulating me for doing the right thing in the end, and telling me never to make the same mistake again. I loved him so much for that. He was so sharp, his mind. He never seemed to sleep. He'd be poring over books in his library until the small hours or going for long midnight walks to ruminate, he told me. It's a habit I inherited. But he was bodily strong, too. I clearly remember he could pick things up easily, like they were nothing, even when they were too heavy for my papa, his son, who was by no means a weak man. I also remember that my papa said Grandpa had never been ill a day of his life. His hair was almost all white, but he was still strong in body and mind, and hardly had any wrinkles at all, except for some fine laughter lines around his eyes. I remember him just like he was in that photograph. He was always so active, and he'd exercise with such rigor, such discipline, and say it was important to keep his muscles active before he wasted away. He always told me it was important to keep healthy and eat right, too. I wonder now if all that healthy living was really just a front, so none of us would suspect. He never did get any illness or infection. No matter what we came home with, no cold or flu ever struck him down, even when it had torn through the rest of the household. As it was, we just accepted that his meticulously healthy lifestyle had meant that he'd aged remarkably well and remained so healthy. Faced with such a situation, would you ever think anything else? All in all, he was such a clever, upstanding, well-loved man. It was so easy to overlook those more difficult memories, to forget them entirely even. One day, we went out on a walk. I was staying at his house during the school holidays, as I often did. He took me to the shops. It turned out to be one of the worst days of my childhood. I can't remember the trip itself. While it was happening, I didn't know that I would ever have such sinister reasons to recall it. I just remember, though, that partway through, after speaking to someone, he came away angry. So furious. I've never seen him that way. I think there had been a run-in, an argument with someone. I'd been distracted the whole time because I was clutching a chocolate bar I wanted him to buy for me, and I was tugging on his shirt. And then I looked up at him and saw the reason he wasn't paying attention to me. He was so angry, he wasn't even seeing me. He ended our outing early. Boy, did I know better than to pester him about the chocolate bar again. I put it down so fast. He took me home, not saying a word. He didn't join us for dinner. I had all but forgotten about it, except that I heard him getting up to leave the house in the middle of the night. He often did go for late walks, but somehow the noise he was making, hurried, agitated, just signaled to me that something was wrong. I got up in the dark, padded across the carpet barefoot, clutching my nightgown about me, and met him in the hallway on his way out. He was dressed up in a long, dark coat. He was surprised to see me. He picked me up and kissed my forehead, took me back to my bed and tucked me in. Told me not to worry. "You might hear some strange sounds, though, Anna," he said. "If you hear the sound of screaming, put your fingers in your ears and close your eyes. Do you understand?" I nodded, and he closed my bedroom window, drew the curtains, and went out again. I didn't hear anything in that first part of the night, but I didn't sleep a wink. I kept tossing and turning, wondering where he was, what he was doing. Why had he said what he did? Was he okay? Whose screaming did he anticipate? His own? Someone else's? Why wasn't I supposed to listen? I kept my ears strained, but didn't hear anything out of the ordinary. When he came home some hours later, he shut the door gently and made almost no noise on the stairs. He was trying to be quiet, get back into his room undisturbed, but I was wide awake and alert, and my ears were straining for any small sound. My heart leapt when I heard him come in. I'd been so scared that something would happen to him. I clambered off the bed and ran, shivering, to meet him again on the stairs. I had never before seen him as he was that night. The sight knocked the breath out of me. For one thing, he was injured. He was limping and bruised, and his lip torn. I had never thought that he would have been at the losing end of a fight. He was unnaturally strong. I honestly can't remember any time before that night when I had seen him with any injury whatsoever, never even a scrape. The sight would have made me feel sorry for him. But what kept my sympathy choked up was this. The second thing, he looked furiously angry, a determined, savage look in his eyes, cold. I'm afraid to say it, but he looked almost cruel. I ran to him and held out my arms, uncertain what to say but wanting to reassure him, and needing reassurance myself. For the first time in my memory, he didn't hug me, he barely looked at me. I reached out to him, but he avoided my touch, irritated, something he'd never done before, ever. I went back to bed, desolate, so upset that my dear grandpa was hurt. But I felt wounded that he'd ignored me and treated me so coldly, so incredibly unlike his normal self. I cried myself to sleep, wallowing in self-pity and confusion. My tears had exhausted me, and I was almost asleep when the sound of the first scream came. I don't think I'll ever be able to convey to you, Katie, what a sound that was. It was unlike any human sound I have ever heard. The very sound filled me with such a deep, intense terror that I forgot all my thoughts. Everything was knocked out of my head. It felt like I did not exist anymore. It felt like I was just a body filled with fear. The sound seemed to evoke something primal in me. A fear so intense I never thought possible. A fear so deep it physically hurt. I could barely breathe. I could barely move, and I was soaked in sweat and my bed sheets clung to my clammy body, but somehow I managed to drag the covers over my head. That's when the next scream came. That's when I remembered what Grandpa had said. And I put my fingers in my ears so tightly that my ear canals ached. Whatever it was that was making that sound, I didn't even want to think about it. I screwed my eyes shut and curled up my knees to my face. I didn't sleep. Every time I got close to dozing, I jerked awake because I was afraid my hands would become loose and fall away from my ears. I couldn't risk that. The next morning, Grandpa came down. He said nothing, still looking stern. And what was even more unsettling, his injuries were all gone. I remember staring at him, astonished, but he said nothing, nor did he look at me. He just went back to his books after breakfast. I suppose I thought I must have imagined everything. Except, a few days later, there was an unexplained death. A man was found with unusual injuries. They said he seemed to have been pulverized somehow, except they couldn't explain it. The work didn't seem like anything a human could do. They suspected perhaps some extreme disease. They'd identified him by his dental records. I remember looking at the photo in the paper. I was certain I'd seen him in the shop that day. I was too afraid to ask Grandpa about it. The news died out in a few days. And I suppose so did my memory. As he returned to normal, my loving, clever, kind Grandpa, I forgot all about it. The second time I heard the screams was a few years later. I was about 10 years old. That time, it wasn't just one night, but 3 nights in a row. And it all came back. I did as he told me that first time, and put my fingers in my ears. In the mornings, it would feel as though nothing had happened. But then came the news that there was a young man missing from our neighborhood. Worry seemed to gnaw at me. I don't think would ever have linked the two things together, except for the fact that I noticed that Grandpa seemed uneasy whenever my parents discussed the missing man, or saw an article about him, or any time anyone expressed any concern about the case. Again, my mind made excuses. It was a coincidence. I resolutely ignored it. Some days later, I read in the newspaper that the missing man was found. Alive, thankfully, but with puzzling injuries, internal hemorrhaging. He was ranting and raving about a large, black, terrifying winged creature, and screams that had almost torn up his body. As soon as I read that, I looked at my grandpa. We were sitting at opposite ends of the dinner table while I read the newspaper over dinner. His eyes met mine, those uncanny, wise, chimera eyes. And for once, it was me who was reading his wrongdoings. And through that strange, dark eye of his, he could read me. He knew that I knew. But as the years wore on, I don't know. When it's all written out together like this, it seems undeniably terrible, ominous. But when these events are like rare blips, with long stretches of unremarkable, completely normal days all the rest of the while, it's so easy to forget. It's easy to cajole yourself into disbelief. You have to understand. I didn't have the collective knowledge of the internet. I knew nothing about those terrible legends. The lore. All I knew was what I had seen and heard. The dead of the night. I had only disjointed evidence at best. I knew nothing about where the screams originated. I had no direct evidence that my grandpa was involved at all, only that he had given me that singular warning. My parents knew nothing of what had been going on. The only person who knew was my grandpa. When he gave no indication that anything was wrong, it was difficult for me to believe otherwise. When the days went back to normal, those memories felt only like vague nightmares, less and less vivid and less believable with the passage of time. Besides, when you love someone, you make excuses. You want to push things under the rug. You don't want to face the truth. When you're little, you doubt you even know the truth. The years matured me, and I became certain that my infant brain had been over-sensationalizing things. How could my grandpa, with his upright moral character, his kindness, his wisdom, how could he possibly be connected with anything sinister? I approached my middle teens. Grandpa started to talk more and more about how he wouldn't be around forever. He laid it on thick with the life advice. More conversations revolved around what to do when he wasn't around anymore. It made my heart so sad to hear him speak like that. I'd tell him he was as fit as a fiddle, that he shouldn't talk so pessimistically. He was healthier than my papa, his own son. He would wave my protests aside and tell me to be serious. He would talk to me about my life plans. He would tell me about things to be wary of. He would tell me that I needed to be careful, make wise decisions. But then I noticed, steadily, he began to deteriorate. My brave, strong grandfather. He would stop and look around with that dark eye of his, and he'd start. Sometimes, he would lose track of conversations, distracted. He started crying out in the night. Papa suspected dementia or some other mental illness. We'd never seen him so distracted, so confused before. Combined with his incessant talk of his demise, I finally began to get concerned. We mentioned getting examined at a doctor, but he resolutely refused. It went on for some time. We were scheduled to on a family holiday. My parents and I, Grandpa never came with us on our trips, but I didn't want to leave him. My parents left without me, and I stayed with him. And that's when it happened. One night in particular, I could hear him pacing, rummaging around in his study. I laid awake and wondered. His eyes roamed, always distracted, and didn't focus on my conversation. I couldn't get rid of the awful feeling that he wasn't losing his mind. It was much worse, much more sinister. He was confused and vulnerable because for the first time in his life, he was distracted and he was finally afraid of something. I think I found this thought worse than anything else. I thought about it all night long. For some reason, it was all coming back to me, those suppressed thoughts. The memory of the screams, the body, the missing man, my grandfather's uncanny sharpness, his charm, his knowledge, his strength and perception. It wasn't natural. Why was he like this? What was he? Was everything catching up with him now? Was that why he was afraid? I drifted into an uneasy slumber, and that was when I had the nightmare. I dreamt that I heard something from Grandpa's study. In my dream, I rose from my bed and went towards the study. The lights wouldn't turn on, so I just crept down the stairs and through the hall in the darkness. I was shivering because the heating wasn't on. It was winter, and it was cold. Was there a power cut? I reached the corridor leading to the study and stopped. There was a dark figure standing in the corridor, facing away from me. A man in a coat with the hood up over his head. "Grandpa?" I said. The figure turned around. His face was obscured in the darkness. "So you're his granddaughter," he said, turning around. He spoke in a low but clear voice, rasping slightly. I would never have taken that creature for a family man. I took a step back and wanted to run away, but seemed frozen. "Look what your grandfather did to me." He lowered his hood. It was a terrible face, withered, melted features. He looked like a walking corpse. I think might have gasped or screamed. My grandfather emerged from the door behind him, from the study. The man in the coat took a step forward and grabbed me, pulled me to him and turned around, so we were both facing my grandpa. My back was to this man-corpse, and its arm was around me, pulling me into his chest. "Every villain has its weakness, then," said the man-corpse, speaking evenly. "Even wicked monsters such as yourself." I was crying, silently. "Let us see you call your helper. Call him upon me again to finish the job. It'll kill your Anna, too." I felt his chest heave behind me against my back as he laughed, a humorless laugh. "After all, you have no hesitation killing the children of others." Grandpa was looking at me, his mouth set into a hard line. He made a sudden move and wrenched me away from the man. He pushed me away. I fell into the floor bodily, winded. "Run!" he said. He was distracted in saving me. I heard a gunshot. I saw Grandpa fall to the floor. I heard the man laughing, and then I fainted. I woke up in my own bed. It was daytime. Sunlight was pouring through the window. It was a cold, clear day. It took me a while to remember everything, but when I did, God, can you imagine my relief to learn that it was all a dream? I rushed from my bed, my feet getting tangled up in my sheets. When I managed to extract myself, I ran to the study downstairs, and my heart sank when I saw the door was open. His books and papers were disheveled and strewn out. There was blood everywhere. I think for some time I lost my mind. I wasn't able to follow or even provide any lucid evidence for the police investigation that followed. I just knew it was pointless. I didn't know what to believe. All these years, I couldn't understand if it had been a dream or not. All these years, I was so confused. If it hadn't been a dream, If the dream had just been the product of me hearing sounds in the night, then he was still dead and gone. He had been so uncharacteristically nervous those last few days. If it hadn't been a dream, I had seen him die. I had caused him to die. And he died a villain. Over the years, my love for him overwhelmed me once again. I was able to reason with myself that those things I'd seen were just my imagination. The screams were just coincidence. Someone drunk, screaming in the street perhaps, and I'd exaggerated the sound in my mind later on. Wild, nonsensical stuff, made up by my child's brain. It was all ridiculous, beyond ridiculous. That the last night had been a dream, caused by the violent noises of a robbery that had killed my grandfather, as the police hypothesized. They'd ransacked the house, much of Grandpa's things were missing, and gotten rid of his body. The therapist validated my reason. I learned to love and admire my grandpa again, just as I had known him, outside of those terrible nights. Today, that was all destroyed. Never, even in my wildest, most frightened thoughts, had I imagined the sheer scale of it. Never had I thought he might be alive, still. Even if I had, tentatively, thought that there was a chance that he escaped that night alive, I didn't think he would still be alive today, so many years on. Never. I knew he was unnaturally healthy for his age, but that he's been around and feared for centuries. God, the thought of it. I knew him as loving, but the world around him did not, and I suppose I caught glimpses of that other perspective. And I know now, I knew only a small fraction of his life, of his character. I don't blame you, my darling, for uncovering all this. It pains me, yes. But we must face up to the truth, no matter how sinister, how terrible it is. End of Mum's letter. So, there it is. You know, I think I'm going to try and fine-tune out everything I can about him now. All the lore surrounding him. Seeing my mother in hospital. I'll admit, it was a frightening shock. I still don't know what happened, or the true extent of things, and I have no idea what this man is capable of. He seems to have that dark undercurrent that was much larger and much darker than my mum could have known. But I do think it is better for us to be armed with knowledge than blindly wandering in the dark. If anyone saw the original post on Old School Cool and commented there, with their experiences or legends about him from your area, I'd appreciate if you could share with me anything you know via PM. I'm going to try and find out everything. I have no idea what I'm doing or where to begin. I can barely gather my thoughts or make up my mind what to believe or how to think or interpret things. It's so confusing and so ominous, all of it. I don't know where it'll take me, but I have to do something. I'll try and compile all I find out and keep you updated.